Good morning, church. Good morning. Is it okay if I sit down with you guys this morning? Thanks. I was going to do it anyways. Well, I was given this topic, not alone in the ashes. And y'all, I struggled with it this week a whole lot, really trying to think of what it meant to be in the ashes. And so I want to start with this statement, that naming that we are in the ashes and learning to let our pride and our prejudice die there is part of recognizing that we aren't alone in it. Will you pray with me? Creator and sustainer God, thank you for being here with us. Sometimes we forget. Sometimes we feel alone and hurt and lost, and the way forward doesn't seem clear. And so, God, this morning I pray that you remind us in new and beautiful ways. Remind us through one another. Remind us through the beautiful sunshine. Continue to remind us that we are yours and that we are not alone. Amen. So in youth group every week, some of my youth in here might know we do this, something called Happy Crappies. This is something I've grown up doing my whole life, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We spend time right when we get together sitting down and saying, what's one happy thing from your week? And what's something crappy from your week? This is something that I grew up with. It's an activity that I learned to love. It's something that I started doing when I was probably in 8th grade in youth group. And for me, Happy Crappies are an invitation to be real. That the first thing that we're going to talk about together is just life. We'll sit down and we will be with one another. The invitation in a Happy Crappy is to look at both the good times and the hard times and to hold them both up in front of us in the tensions of life. And it is an invitation to exist in a community that will hold that will hold your life. Let me say that again. It's an invitation to exist in a community that will hold your life. A community that celebrates the good with you and sits in the bad with you. And the Happy Crappy is the most basic and beautiful invitation to share your life, knowing that life happens, the good and the bad, for all of us. So, happy. In some of the hardest moments of my life, the church has been there. And crappy. Church has hurt some of the people that I love the most. Both are true. And let's be clear, we are in it. In the mess of humanity, in the mess of relationships, in the mess of sickness and pain, in the mess of financial worry, in the mess of poor self-image, in the mess of family, in the mess of life. We are in it. And I'm sorry to say that today's sermon isn't necessarily a happy one. But it's not necessarily a crappy one. And if there's any truth that you hear today, I want you to hear this, that you, wherever you are in life, are not alone, that you are beautiful and that you are loved. The fact is, life is messy. We are messy. And just saying that you're not alone in it doesn't all the time magically just make it better. And I struggle with that. That's what I struggled with this week. That it sounds like that to not be alone in the ashes, that's the answer. Is that, okay, we're together, everything's good. But what happens when not everything's good? I struggle with this idea that there isn't a quick fix or the right answer all the time. That would be nice, right? A genie in the bottle with 3 wishes, and one wish we would obviously use to wish for unlimited wishes so that we could fix everything. Everything would be fixable. Whatever that means. See, maybe we want to fix things sometimes that never actually needed to be fixed in the first place. Have you ever worked so hard on something just to end up making it worse than it was off in the first place? So when I was a kid, my dad and I put together a few model airplanes and ships, and I can remember the meticulous work of popping out these pieces of plastic from their frames and gluing these small pieces together with super glue. I really remember super glue because my fingers were stuck together through half of the project. Anyways, some of these pieces were very difficult to get out of the plastic sheet. If you've made models before, you know that this is true. And as the super patient kid that I was building this model, I would just try to twist and pull and rip and do anything that I could to get the piece out of the plastic. And here's the problem. When you twist and rip and pull in an attempt to hurry things along, you end up creating a twisted mess of plastic that doesn't fit very well in your model. This sort of patience maybe has transferred to my adult life. Happy. We've spent multiple days painting our new house, and we're making some real progress. Crappy. I rushed the process and tried to fix the paint on the wall while it was still wet. Now I've created a whole new color right at the seam of the wall. Awesome. Oftentimes, the messes that we create are just the result of us trying too hard to twist and pull and fix a situation instead of just being present with each other and waiting on God in that situation. Happy crappies in youth group aren't always easy. In fact, they can be sort of intimidating sometimes, because ultimately, admitting that life is crappy means admitting that we're not perfect and that we share in the mess of humanity. And maybe admitting we aren't alone is actually one of the hardest parts. I think Paul knew this, and I think that Jesus knew this, and I think that it was one of Jesus' greatest temptations, to fix it. We all just want to fix it. Whatever it is, get it fixed. The flickering light down the hallway, just fix it. The dripping faucet in the guest bath that nobody uses, just fix it. Your almost 2-year-old throws a tantrum in the store, get the hostess cupcakes and fix it. Pipes break in the walls of the Cairo room during a winter storm, call Rich and get it fixed. It feels good to get things fixed.
By the way, Rich called all of us.
By the way, Rich was making the calls. It feels good to get things fixed, to be done with something, and to wrap it up with a bow, and to see smiles all around. But church, what happens when there's not a clear, quick fix? What happens when you have to sit with an 11-year-old who doesn't have a mom anymore after a car accident? What happens when cancer comes back? What happens when relationships break? See, one of the hardest things to figure out as a parent, in my limited experience as a parent thus far, is how to talk to my kids about the reality of death and loss. Because it's something that they're faced with already. And I know that deep down, those realities, I can't put a Band-Aid on. They are things that I can't fix. And those things that I can't fix are the things that scare me the most. And those things that I can't fix are perhaps the things that never needed to be fixed, because death and loss is certainly a part of the beauty of life. But I can show up. I can be there for tough conversations with my kids and my students and my family. I can sit and cry and yell and stomp and get angry. I can be in the ashes and recognize that the ashes have always been around. See, even Jesus was reminded that the quick fix for hunger in the desert wasn't worth it. Instead, Jesus reminds us to sit with our ashes, to let the mess remind us of our humanity, and to let our humanity remind us that at the most basic level, we are not alone. This is the beauty of the gospel, that the God of the universe decided to be with us in this beautiful mess of life. He decided to sit at tables with his disciples and do happy crappies. At least in my mind, that's what he did. He decided that the temptation to fix it was really just a farce all along, and that the only way through is to feel it, to live it, and to share it. Our text for today, I know you were wondering if we were going to get there. We're there. Our text for today comes from Paul's letter to the Romans in chapter 12. So Paul has been feeling it and living it, and in these verses, I think that he's trying to find a way to share it. So chapter 12 begins with a therefore, and if you see a therefore, you have to go back and find out what it's there for. So we look back at the last chapter, in chapter 11, when we realize that Paul is leaving his readers in chapter 11 with the mystery of God. See, Romans is an interesting book because Paul is really just kind of pitching himself and his theology to these people in Rome that he doesn't really know super well yet. And so for most of this book, Paul is writing about his own theology, about God, what he thinks of God, how he thinks God works. And then in chapter 12, we get this subtle shift in tone. We know that whatever comes next in this chapter is important, at least important enough for Paul to stick it in the middle of his theological beliefs and to send it to a community that he doesn't really have much context for. And the section of chapter 12 that we are in comes right after Paul writes to the church about how the body of Christ functions. And we've heard this before because Paul writes about it a lot. It's important to him. And I think it should be important for us. The message is essentially this, that each of us as members of the body have gifts, and that we offer those gifts up for the common good, and that the body comes together as we use those gifts for service in the community. That the work of Christ, that the body of Jesus does meaningful and life-bringing work in the world when we come together and offer ourselves up. This is the ideal. This is what Paul hopes for, a picture of community that works together and values each of its members in unique and in life-giving ways that ultimately amplify the end result of their actions together. This is what kingdom on earth looks like. But we're in Lent, in the ashes, and life certainly doesn't always feel like the picture-perfect vision of shared life in community. Sometimes it feels more like a combine of illness and emotions and uncertainty. So what gives Paul? Well, let's hear him out, because now we've come to verses 10 through 18. And he says this: "Be devoted to one another with mutual love and affection." I've got a different version in my text, so I'm going to read from up there so y'all can follow along. "Love one another with mutual affection. Outdo one another in showing honor. Do not lag in zeal. Be ardent in spirit. Serve the Lord. Rejoice in hope. Be patient in affliction. And persevere in prayer. Contribute to the needs of the saints. Pursue hospitality to strangers. Bless those who persecute you. Bless and do not curse them. Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be arrogant, but associate yourselves with the lowly. Do not claim to be wiser than you are. Do not repay anyone evil for evil, but take thought for what is noble in the sight of all. If it is possible, I love this verse, if it is possible, so far as it depends on who you are, live peaceably together with all people. The word of God for the people of God. We say together, thanks be to God. The ashes are reminding us of something. That it's not easy to let go of our own impatience, of our own expectations, of our own certainties. Sometimes it's hard to let go of doing things our own way. But in the ashes, we are all reduced down to carbon, the very building blocks of life, and we are reminded that we are all together in the mess. We are all one, no greater or lesser than the other. There may be no quick fix and no easy solution for whatever situation we find ourselves in, but in the ashes, we recognize we are human and that so is everyone else. Seems to me that some of the hardest moments in life point us further outside of ourselves. And I think that this is because at our core, we are relational beings, created to live and to be together. Paul points us to the importance of community in the midst of uncertainty. Remember talking about God and the mystery of God, and then all of a sudden, Paul starts talking about love and community and how we are to be together. In the middle of the weeds of our belief and theologies, Paul points to love. When our minds can't get wrapped around what is going on in the world, he points to the other, to the lowly, to the one that we didn't see before. These ashes are calling us out of our tendency to live only for ourselves. So in this season of Lent, may we know that we all live in the ashes, that we have become the ashes, and we're called to know that we're not alone there. Growing up and early on in my ministry, there were always stipulations on happy crappies. So I would introduce them to my group and say, okay, this is how we do this. A happy is a happy thing from your week. Crappy is a crappy thing from your week. Now, you can have as many happies as you want, but you can only have as many crappies as happies, or you have to have more happies than crappies. That was a stipulation. That's what I grew up with, and that's kind of how I led my groups going forward. And I realized a few years ago that I don't think that's making the mark. It's not cutting it. Because real is sitting in all of it. Letting crappy be crappy and letting happy be happy. No qualifiers, no justifications. We bring it all. Just real life. And there, in the ashes, we sit together, knowing that in our different realities, whatever they might be, we are not alone. Because we weep with those who weep. We mourn with those who mourn, and we rejoice with those who rejoice. That's church. Amen.